The dust swirled around my boots as I stood outside Holbrook's general store, staring through the window like a stray dog. My stomach cramped from hunger, and my hand trembled as I clutched the only thing I had left, my wedding ring. The gold band once sat warm and proud on my finger, a promise from a man now buried beneath Kansas clay. It was worth something once. Now it just mocked me. I stepped inside. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle, and every head in the store turned toward me. My cheeks burned. The bodice of my dress hung loose, worn from travel, and my shawl barely hid the holes in my sleeves. I walked up to the counter, heart thudding like it might betray me and leap clean out my chest. Mr. Holbrook stood behind the counter, broad and greasy, arms crossed over a stained apron. His mustache twitched as he squinted at me. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" I swallowed and set the ring down on the wood between us. "I'd like to trade this. Bread. Beans, if you can spare." He didn't even reach for it, just gave it a passing glance and shook his head. "Gold don't fill bellies, miss, and I ain't running a charity." "It's real," I said, hearing the crack in my voice. "It belonged to my husband. He passed." I stopped. That word was too soft for what happened. He was crushed when the roof of the mine collapsed. They didn't even dig all the way to him, just sealed the shaft and sent me a notice. "I'm sorry for your loss," Holbrook said, flatly, not sounding sorry at all. "But we need strong backs for harvest, not trinkets." I stared at the ring. Its once shining surface was dull now, scuffed by time and desperation. "Please," I whispered. Behind me, someone coughed. I could feel their eyes on the torn seam at my shoulder, the way I stood too light on my feet, as if a good wind could blow me sideways. "I walked 10 miles this week, slept in a barn outside town. I ain't asking for steak, just a little bread." Holbrook sighed and slid the ring back across the counter with a stubby finger. "Try your luck elsewhere." Something broke inside me. The tears didn't come. I'd run out of those 2 towns ago. What came instead was a hollow ache. I picked up the ring and turned to leave. My pride tried to stand tall, but my knees nearly buckled. I'd made it this far, clinging to that tiny scrap of gold in the hope it meant something. It didn't. Not anymore. "Wait," a voice said from behind me. I turned. A tall man stepped forward from the shelves, a sack of feed over one shoulder, dust on his boots, and a calm, steady look in his eyes. Brown hair curled slightly under his hat, and his jaw was unshaven but clean in a way that suggested work, not laziness. "I'll cover her tab," he said simply. Holbrook frowned. "Daniel," he said, "I'll cover it." He didn't look at me right away. Just set down the feed, pulled a worn leather billfold from his coat, and laid a few coins on the counter. Then he turned and our eyes met. His gaze wasn't pitying. It was something else entirely, like he was seeing me, not just the dirt on my skin or the wear in my dress. "Come on," he said, picking up his sack. "You look like you need a meal and a job. I can offer both." I blinked. "What?" "I'm Daniel Harper. My family's ranch is a few miles out. We could use a cook." He nodded toward the door. "You can ride back with me if you have a mind to." Just like that. No leering, no price in his eyes, just a calm offer, like he did this every day, offered women on the verge of collapse a chance to stand again. I should have said no. I should have clutched my ring and walked out with what was left of my pride. But when I looked at him, something in me, the part that hadn't yet died, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe it was a beginning. I didn't trust him, not at first. A man like Daniel Harper, with that strong, silent confidence and clear eyes that didn't flinch from mine, men like that didn't usually offer help without some catch. But I didn't have the strength to argue, Not after days walking under that punishing sun with nothing in my belly but regret. He handed me a small cloth bag as we stepped out of Holbrook's store. Bread, beans, and dried apples. I took it like it was made of glass. "Eat," he said. "We'll ride in 10. A horse waited outside, already saddled. A second mare was tethered nearby, tall, chestnut brown with a white blaze down her nose. Daniel untied her reins and handed them to me. "You ride?" "Used to," I said quietly, fingers tightening around the saddle horn. We didn't speak much on the road. I rode behind him, watching the line of his shoulders, the relaxed way he sat in the saddle. His rifle was tied to the side of his horse, dusty from use. I kept waiting for the moment he'd glance back with something cruel in his mouth, but it never came. The prairie rolled out before us in quiet golds and tans, broken only by dry creek beds and clusters of mesquite. After an hour, the land began to change, richer grass, wooden fence posts, and the faint smell of cattle. "This is Harper Ranch," he said as we crested a low hill. It was bigger than I expected. A proper barn, windmill spinning lazily, and a main house made of thick-hewn logs and covered porch. Off to the side stood a bunkhouse and smokehouse. Chickens scratched near a water trough, and a dog barked once before quieting. Daniel dismounted and gave a whistle. From the barn a man emerged, tall, older, with silver at his temples and a limp in his left leg. "Jacob Harper, my father," Daniel said. The old man looked me over but said nothing, just nodded once, then turned back toward the barn like he'd seen ghosts before. "Come on. You'll stay in the east room. That used to be my ma's. She passed last spring." I froze. "Are you sure?" He gave me a tired look. "Are you hungry enough to argue, Eliza?" Hearing him say my name did something to me. Made it real. Inside, the house was simple but clean. Wood floors worn smooth by boots and time, a kitchen with an iron stove and long pine table, a parlor with a faded rug and 2 armchairs. The east room had lace curtains and a quilted bed, and when I closed the door, I let myself sit on the edge and cry. Not loud, not long, just enough. That night I cooked a pot of beans with bacon from the smokehouse, added biscuits from scratch and a blackberry preserve I found in the pantry. The ranch hands, 4 of them, ate like wolves. I noticed how they looked at me, and how Daniel noticed too. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod across the table when supper was done. After the meal, I gathered the dishes, but Daniel stepped in beside me. "Don't do it all tonight. You've done enough." I hesitated, then said, "Thank you, for back there." He leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You didn't belong on that store floor." "Maybe I did," I muttered. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You belong somewhere that saw your worth." I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Then I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the wedding ring. It sat in my palm like a stone. "I used to think this would save me." Daniel looked at it a long moment. "Sometimes," he said, "gold just weighs a woman down." He turned and left me with that thought, boots echoing soft on the wooden floor. And for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. The first morning on Harper Ranch, I rose before the rooster crowed. The air was crisp, biting through my threadbare shawl as I stepped into the kitchen and stirred the embers back to life. It felt good to move, to make something again. After weeks of wandering, of begging with my eyes and shrinking under stares, the rhythm of work was a comfort. By the time the men came in, I had biscuits baking, beans reheating, and coffee boiling thick and black on the stove. They filed in one by one, some curious, some cautious. None spoke much. Ranch hands weren't known for small talk, especially around a stranger in a woman's apron. But after 2 helpings and strong coffee, one of them, a freckled man named Hatch, let out a satisfied grunt and said, "Damn fine cooking, ma'am." The others nodded, one of them thumping his tin cup on the table in agreement. I said nothing, but inside, something loosened. I'd passed the first test. Daniel didn't come in until later. He leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly as I wiped flour from the counter and tied up the trash of peelings. He didn't say much, just gave me that quiet nod of his and a soft, "They like you already." "I didn't do it to be liked," I said. His lip quirked, half smile, half understanding. "Did it to survive." I looked up, met his eyes. I've had enough of feeling useless. Later, he showed me around the place properly. The chicken coop needed fixing, the bunkhouse leaked, the root cellar was half flooded from spring rains. Everything was worn, but alive, like the land itself was trying to hold on. "You're not just cooking," he said, as we checked the storeroom. "You're part of this now, if you want to be." "I ain't afraid of work." "Didn't think you were." He paused before adding, "You'll have your own pay, weekly, and your say in how things are run in the kitchen and house." I stared at him. "You don't have to give me that." "I know," he said simply. Most men I'd known, back in town, back before, acted like kindness was something they had to loan out in bits. But Daniel Harper didn't move that way. He was steady, like the earth under my boots when everything else had felt like water. By week's end, I'd scrubbed the kitchen top to bottom, made lists for stores, and figured out which of the ranch hands could be trusted to peel potatoes without trying to steal a kiss. The answer was Hatch and Bill, and definitely not Tom, who tried it once and earned himself a slap that made his ear ring for a day. Daniel didn't scold me for it. When he heard, all he said was, "Tom won't try again." He was right. By the second Sunday, I made a proper supper. Roast beef, sweet carrots, warm apple cobbler, and the men were full and quiet and smiling. Jacob Harper even lingered at the table to ask if I'd grown up cooking. "No," I said, "didn't need to, but I learned fast when I had to." He nodded. "You remind me of Margaret. Stubborn as a wet mule." I didn't know whether that was a compliment or not, but I took it. That night, alone in my room, I looked at my wedding ring again. It sat on the windowsill now, catching moonlight. I hadn't worn it in days. The indent on my finger had started to fade. The grief hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape. No longer a sharp thorn, but a weight I could carry. I thought of my husband's laugh, of his hands in the mine dust, of the promises we made. And then I thought of Daniel Harper, of his silence, his steadiness, his kindness with no strings. I wasn't healed, but I wasn't starving anymore either. And somewhere in that middle ground, I began to feel like a person again.
The days passed, soft as butter on a hot griddle. Out on the plains, time moved slow, measured not by clocks, but by chores, sun angles, and the sound of boots on wood. I found my rhythm in it. Each sunrise brought fresh bread to bake, eggs to fry, meat to cure. Every evening, I lit the lamp in the parlor and sat by the window, hands idle, heart less so. Daniel Harper wasn't a man of many words, but I began to read him in other ways. In the way he'd come into the kitchen with sleeves rolled and ask if I needed wood brought in, or if the water bucket needed changing. In how he never let his eyes linger on my figure like some of the others did, but noticed just the same. He brought me prairie flowers one evening, wild purple blooms in a chipped enamel mug. Said nothing about 'em, just set 'em on the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at them for a long time after he left. Another morning, I found he'd already drawn water before I woke, and the chickens had been fed. "Figured you could use a rest," he said, then tipped his hat and headed out like it hadn't meant anything. But it did, and my heart knew it before I did. I started watching him differently after that. Not just his hands, rough and tan from rope and tool work, but the quiet strength in his posture, the way he looked at the horizon like it owed him nothing, but he faced it anyway. I caught myself smiling more, laughing at stupid jokes Hatch made, even humming while I worked. But I was also scared. Late at night, when the wind creaked the shutters and the lantern burned low, I'd hold that wedding ring in my palm and feel like a traitor. I still dreamed of my husband, his laugh, his smell, the weight of him in our bed. Could a woman carry love for one man and still feel her knees tremble at the touch of another? One evening, after a long supper, I stayed on the porch watching the sky bleed pink. Daniel came up beside me, arms crossed. He said, "Storm's coming." I said, "I can smell it." We stood in silence for a bit, the kind that wasn't awkward, just full. Then he surprised me. "You ever think about leaving Kansas?" I looked at him. "Every damn day." His mouth twitched. "Then why stay?" I exhaled. "Because maybe it ain't about running. Maybe it's about choosing." He nodded, slow. "That's a fine way to put it." I glanced at him, then down at my hand. The ring was still there, but tonight I slipped it off, for the first time. I didn't say anything, just let the weight of it settle in my pocket. He noticed. His eyes flicked to the motion, then back to mine. He didn't smile, didn't ask, but something passed between us like smoke and heat. That night I dreamed of bare feet in river water, of laughter under cottonwood trees, of two hands, not one. And when I woke, I didn't cry.
Ranch life settled into a rhythm that felt almost holy. Breakfast before dawn, chores by sunup, supper at dusk with the warm hum of men's voices filling the room like prayer. Daniel and I moved around each other with an ease I hadn't known since childhood, like two animals drawn to the same watering hole, cautious but bound by thirst. But peace, I was learning, is a thing that rarely lasts long on the prairie. The trouble started with strangers. New hands rode in, men looking for work, rough around the edges but experienced. Daniel needed the help. Cattle drives were coming, and there were more miles of fence than Harper Ranch had boots to walk them. One of them was a man named Wade. He was tall, sharp-jawed, and too charming by half. The kind of man who smiled wide while watching you out the corner of his eye. He tipped his hat and called me Miss Eliza, always with that syrupy drawl. Said I looked prettier each morning. At first, I laughed it off. I'd dealt with worse. But the way he stood too close when I served coffee, or how his hand lingered when handing me firewood, made my stomach twist. "I don't like him," I told Daniel one evening while we salted pork. He didn't look up. "He touch you?" "No." "Then I'll keep watching." A week later, cattle went missing. 2 calves and 1 branded steer. No signs of rustlers, no broken fences. "Hooves don't vanish," Jacob growled. "Someone's moving 'em at night." More fences turned up cut. Tension thickened. Men snapped at each other over nothing. And all the while, Wade kept smiling. One afternoon, I caught him staring at me through the kitchen window, just standing there while I chopped onions. Not moving, just watching. I told Daniel that night. He stiffened, but didn't speak. The next morning, Wade didn't show up for chores. Daniel found him behind the barn, face bloodied and lip split. No one knew or claimed to know what happened. Wade wouldn't say a word, just grinned with a mouthful of red and kept his distance after that. But the real trouble didn't come from Wade, not directly. It came from a name whispered in the bunkhouse after dark. Clayton Mason. Mason was a local rancher, fat off railroad money and thirsty for land. Everyone knew he wanted Harper's water, especially since the creek behind our property ran deeper than any within 10 miles. "I'd bet my apron he's behind the cut fences," I told Daniel as we walked the property line. "You think he's bribed Wade?" "I think Wade's just the bait," I said, "and someone else is pulling the line." Daniel looked at me then, truly looked. "You're sharper than you let on." Grief don't make you stupid, it makes you quiet. He reached out and brushed a hair from my cheek. The touch was soft, but it sent fire down my spine. Then we better start speaking up. From that day on, I stopped just cooking. I watched, listened, kept notes on who came and went, when the chickens clucked strange at night, how many shells were left in the rifle box. I'd spent too long surviving to watch this place fall because someone underestimated the woman in the kitchen. I wasn't just feeding the men now. I was protecting them. The creek smelled of blood and gunpowder. It started with a scream, sharp and sudden, cutting through the lull of a twilight like a whip. I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen when I heard it. Then gunfire. 2 shots. A pause. Then 3 more. I grabbed the rifle Daniel kept behind the door and ran. Out past the barn, the shadows were long and twitching. Men were shouting, horses screaming. Bill was dragging a bleeding hatchling calf toward cover, his arm soaked in crimson. Another man lay still by the trough. Then I saw him. Daniel. Slumped against a sycamore tree, hand pressed to his ribs, face pale in the fading light. I didn't think. I ran to him, dropped to my knees. "Daniel! Daniel, stay with me!" His eyes flickered. Should I stayed inside? And let you get yourself killed? Hell no! He tried to sit up, grunting. Wade. He turned. Told Mason everything. My blood went cold. So it was true. Wade had been working with Mason all along, lulling us into routine, gathering intel, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now it had come. Another shot rang out. Bark exploded from the tree above us. I threw myself across Daniel instinctively, shielding him. When I turned, Wade was standing 15 feet away, holding a revolver like it was part of him. Now ain't this a damn shame? Could have had yourself a real man, Eliza. Instead, you played house with the half-dead farmer. My hands tightened on the rifle. Back away, Wade. He laughed. You think I won't shoot a woman? I think you're too much of a coward to shoot one with her eyes open. He raised the gun. I didn't hesitate. The shot cracked through the trees. His shoulder jerked back, and he staggered, dropping the pistol. He looked at me like he couldn't believe it. You shot me! Damn right I did, I said, racking the lever again. He turned and ran, blood trailing behind him. I dropped the rifle and turned to Daniel. His breathing was shallow, sweat beading on his brow. I ripped open his shirt. The bullet had missed his heart, but not by much. Blood bubbled at his side. Help! I shouted. Someone bring me clean cloth, boiling water! Jacob appeared like a ghost, face paled but focused. He barked orders. Hatch came running. A pot clanged inside the house. I pressed a towel to Daniel's wound, tears hot on my cheeks. You're not dying. Not like this. He blinked. You're always bossy? I laughed through the panic. Only when the man I love's bleeding out under a tree. His eyes locked on mine. You mean that? I wouldn't say it unless I did. He winced, but the corner of his mouth lifted. Good. 'Cause I've been in love with you since you slapped Tom that day. By the time the wound was cleaned and bandaged, the fighting had stopped. Wade had fled. Mason's men had retreated, not expecting resistance. But it wouldn't be long before they came back, stronger. I sat beside Daniel all night, holding his hand as he drifted in and out. My apron was soaked with blood, and my heart was raw. But it was mine again. And so was he.
Dawn didn't break. It roared. The sky lit up with fire and hooves, and Mason came for us like a man with nothing left to lose. There were at least 20 riders, guns drawn, dust kicking high as thunderclouds. They wanted our water, our land, our lives, and they were done pretending otherwise. Daniel couldn't stand yet. His side was stitched, but the wound still bled beneath the bandages. He insisted on being carried to the porch anyway, a rifle across his lap, jaw clenched like stone. "I'll shoot from here," he growled. "Ain't going down in a bed." I kissed his forehead. "Just don't get any ideas about dying. I've got supper planned." Jacob took command. "Eliza, get to the root cellar." "No!" His head snapped toward me. "This ain't a request. I'm not hiding while my family fights." He looked ready to argue, but then his eyes softened, like he saw something in me that couldn't be talked away. "Then stay low, and if you go down shooting." The ranch hands set up behind barrels, wagons, hay bales. Every man knew it might be his last stand, but none ran. Not one. I climbed to the hayloft with a Winchester and loaded every round I had. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. The first wave came fast. Gunfire split the air, wood cracked, horses screamed, and a ranch hand named Tobias fell face first into the mud. I squeezed the trigger. One rider tumbled from his saddle, crashing hard. The recoil jolted me, but I didn't stop. Below, Jacob barked orders. Daniel fired slow but steady from the porch, even as blood soaked through his side again. Mason's men circled wide, trying to flank the barn. I saw one crawl through the tall grass, a revolver in each hand. I fired again, missed, cursed. Then I remembered the plan. The stampede. Jacob had talked of it 2 nights ago, before the attack, how the cattle in the north pen could be turned loose, forced toward the creek bed where Mason's riders gathered. But someone had to cut the ropes and drive them. "I'll do it," I said. He looked at me like I was mad. "You'll get trampled." "Not if I run faster than they do." Now, with bullets singing past my head, I slid down the ladder and took off for the north pen. Wade's pistol still hung from my hip. I'd taken it after the shootout. It felt heavy, like it remembered things. The cattle were restless, already sniffing smoke and blood. I cut the ropes, opened the gate, and slapped the nearest bull hard across the flank. "Yeah!" I shouted. "Run, you bastards!" They thundered forward in a wall of muscle and horns. The ground shook under my boots. Mason's men turned too late. Some were crushed, others thrown from their horses. Screams filled the air. And then I saw him, Clayton Mason, sitting proud on a black horse, barking orders, face twisted in rage. He spotted me. "You." He raised his rifle. I raised Wade's pistol and fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder. He reeled, then fell from the saddle. His horse bolted. Mason hit the dirt hard, rolled, and tried to scramble up, but I was already there. I pressed the barrel to his chest. "You think gold gives you power," I said, breath heaving. "But out here, all we've got is grit." He spat blood. "You'll never hold that land," I said. "We already have." And I pulled the trigger. The sun rose slow and pink the morning we buried the dead. 6 of ours, 11 of theirs. The yard smelled of blood and black powder, but beneath it, sweetgrass, coffee, and hope. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. The air was still, the land quiet. We had won. Mason was gone. Wade disappeared into whatever hole snakes crawl back to. The creek behind the barn still flowed strong and clear, untouched by claim or bullet. Daniel was healing. Slow, stubborn healing. He moved from bed to porch and back again with a limp and a scowl, but each day he looked more like the man I first saw in Holbrook's store. Dusty, silent,
with something burning behind his eyes. I brought him stew one night and found him staring out over the pasture. "You ever think about that ring?" he asked, not looking at me. I smiled. "Every night." "You still carry it?" I reached into my apron and held it out. It gleamed in the lamplight, small and unassuming. "Not on my finger, but close." He turned, looked at me full. "I ain't trying to replace what you had, just offering something new." I nodded. "Then let's stop carrying ghosts and start carrying each other." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin band of silver. No stone, just polished metal, cool and strong. "I thought gold wasn't what we needed," I teased. "It ain't, but silver's steadier, less flashy, more honest." We married that Sunday. The whole town came, Holbrook included, who brought bread and a sheepish apology. I wore a dress Margaret Harper had left behind, pale blue with pearl buttons. My hands trembled when I stepped onto the front porch, but not from fear. Daniel stood tall despite the limp, a fresh shave and new shirt, hat held respectfully in his hands. Jacob said the words. The ranch hands stood like nervous boys at a school dance, hats in hands, boots scuffed clean. Hatch cried when we kissed. Afterwards, we danced under the oak behind the barn. Fireflies rose like sparks around us. Someone played a fiddle off-key. The stew burned, and no one cared. Later, I stood alone by the creek, that ring still in my hand. I didn't throw it. Instead, I dug a small hole at the base of the sycamore. Same tree Daniel had bled under. Same place I'd realized I wasn't alone anymore. I buried the ring there, in earth rich with memory and promise. A marker of what was. Not erased, just laid to rest. Now, when I walk the porch and smelled the bread baking, when I see Daniel repairing fence lines with one hand on his hip and that crooked smile when he catches me watching, there's no guilt, no ache. Just gratitude. Because I was Eliza Carter, widow, wanderer. But now I'm Eliza Harper. Wife. Partner. Builder of something stronger than gold.